What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with FantasyPros, giving you my players to cut in Week 4. But before we get started, ready to make a bold statement after dominating the first 3 weeks of your fantasy football league? Introducing the Bling Ring from Trophy Smack, the championship ring that shouts victory. We've teamed up with Trophy Smack to bring you an epic giveaway that will take your league celebrations to the next level. To be eligible, all you need to do is subscribe to FantasyPros YouTube channel, your ultimate source for fantasy football insights and updates. Leave a comment on any of our videos, and that's it. The best part, we'll be announcing the lucky winner right here on the channel, so don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop and when it's time to claim your prize. Get ready to elevate your fantasy football glory with the Bling Ring from Trophy Smack and stand out as the true champion that you are. Subscribe, comment, and let the bling do the talking. Now let's go ahead and dive right in with players to cut in deep leagues of 12 teams or more. First up, JuJu Smith-Schuster. I feel like sometimes we look at JuJu Smith-Schuster with a bit more optimism than is really warranted for him. And I'm guilty of it too. It's easy to look at him and say he has wide receiver 2 upside. He has typically a decent snap count. He was certainly given a decent amount of money that you would expect him to be a decent contributor. But it just feels like we've reached that point where JuJu doesn't really have the juice to have anything beyond decent contribution to your fantasy team. The floor is super low and the ceiling might be around 10 fantasy points. Sometimes we look at JuJu as this 26-year-old wide receiver and we underestimate what his actual timeline really is in the NFL. JuJu is in the 7th year of his career. He was an extremely young rookie. For comparison, Terry McLaurin is in the 5th year of his career. He's 28. Cooper Kupp is 30. He was a rookie at the same time as JuJu. I could be wrong, but I just don't see a scenario where you're plugging JuJu into your lineup and expecting anything more than 8 points. In a 14-team league, it's worth it to keep him because he is on the field, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. But 12 teams or less, there's just more upside on waivers. This past week's matchup against the Jets was a bad scenario for the entire receiving corps, but it's not getting much better moving forward with Dallas or New Orleans, and you likely have better options with better upside on waivers. I just don't think that JuJu has it anymore. Next up, RASHAAD Bateman. Bateman was on my list last week as a contingency cut if Odell Beckham Jr.'s injury wasn't an issue and he was active, because Odell has been playing above Bateman and Bateman has been more like the wide receiver 3, and in the Ravens offense, that's just not a usable fantasy asset. But more specifically, we might need to come to terms with the fact that Bateman just isn't a usable fantasy asset. Bateman left the game with a hamstring injury, but he played the majority of the game. 69% of snaps, which was his highest snap count of the year, and yet, for the 3rd week in a row, he had just 3 targets. And this week, he only caught 1 of them. He is wide receiver 97 in PPR. And we could have some level of optimism because he is a former first-round talent, but we've got no track record of consistent success at all. There's been games here and there with a touchdown and strong yardage, but there's no consistency, and his young career has been riddled with injury. Perhaps in another offense with high pass volume, he could get the chance to shine. But at this point, he's not even the 3rd look. Nelson Aguilar saw stronger usage last week. It's time to cut the bait with Bateman. I'd rather have a guy like Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed, or even a guy like Josh Downs. Next up, Damien Harris. Damien Harris' roster percentage isn't too egregious. He is 35% rostered in Yahoo leagues, not that bad. It's still too high though. When fantasy managers were drafting him, he was being drafted with the premise that he would be the goal line back because that's where he's been successful, and James Cook is an undersized back. The concept is not wrong, but there are 2 big issues here. 1, Cook is being utilized as the primary back. He's seen a minimum of 59% of snaps. He's averaging about 15 carries per game with some receiving work as well, and his yardage and yards per carry have been very strong. He is the lead back. Issue number 2. Those goal line carries could make Damien Harris relevant if he was actually the second back, but he's not. Latavius Murray outsnapped him in every single game this year. That makes him a touchdown-dependent back who is technically the third goal line option behind Josh Allen and Latavius Murray. Drop him. Next up, Rashad Penny. We will wrap things up with the Deep Leagues list with a guy who we talked about last week, Rashad Penny. He's still highly rostered. Maybe it's for the nostalgia, I don't know. But what I do know is that even if you were holding on for a Hail Mary, it's not happening. And it is time to cut Penny. We don't have to do a deep dive into this one. Why? Because there aren't any actual stats to go over. He has none. He had none last week. He had none in week 1. And in week 2, as the only other active back behind Swift after Boston Scott left the game with an injury, Penny had just 3 carries for 9 yards and 1 reception for 5 yards. That is the sum total of his season thus far. He is not in a committee. The committee exists without him. He is not a handcuff. He is lucky to be active. The entire backfield would have to go down and then he still might not be used. Just cut Penny. Moving on to players to cut in shallow leagues. First up, Kadarius Toney. One day we might finally start accepting that Kadarius Toney is essentially throwing up a Hail Mary that is never caught. It's a 10-leg parlay that you miss on the first leg. It just doesn't work. Toney probably shouldn't have played last week. He was dealing with an injury. He played just 3% of snaps and had 1 reception on 1 target for -1 yards. And if you look at his snap count with Kansas City, you start to see a pattern. We get encouraged by the fact that he gets good targets for the amount of snaps that he plays and think, wow, imagine if he just got more snaps. But those snaps never come. Toney is a walking injury that is electric when on the field, but it's pretty clear that Kansas City doesn't actually want him to be on the field constantly. Maybe it's just not good practice for him to play a high amount of snaps. They want to scheme plays for his talent and put him in high upside opportunities, and that's a good plan for the Chiefs, but for our fantasy purposes, it makes him unreliable. You'll never really feel completely comfortable starting him, and for that reason, he is a cut candidate, especially in shallow leagues. Next up, Treylon Burks. I preface this with a disclaimer. This is not Treylon Burks' fault, and I do still believe in his talent. But Tennessee's offense is a hot mess in the worst possible way. And granted, this week was an awful matchup. Cleveland's defense is elite. Ryan Tannehill completed just 13 passes for 104 yards. No one else looks good. Hopkins is wide receiver 46. His best performance was 13.5 fantasy points. Burks' best performance was 3 receptions on 4 targets for 76 yards, a grand total of 10.6 fantasy points. I just don't see where this offense makes a dramatic turnaround in the passing game, and even if it does, Burks is still the wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 2 in an offense that, even if its best passing game script appears, just doesn't push out a ton of volume. Burks is only a cut candidate in shallow leagues because it's still worth it to hold on to him in the event that he does become the top target due to injury because DeAndre Hopkins is up there in age. But in shallow leagues, there's upside players on waivers. I would rather roster guys with higher potential in smaller roles currently than Burks, whose role is fine and solidified, but isn't reliable because it just doesn't produce a high ceiling. Next up, Joshua Kelley. Joshua Kelley, week 1 through week 1. That was it. We got fooled. Week 1 against Miami was an anomaly. And I personally didn't think the week 1 production would be a constant with him. There was just no way that he would have that level of production along with Austin Eckler and have standalone value on a weekly basis. But I did feel like it was a good sign that he was the clear number 2 back and that he could be productive when given the opportunity. And we want to roster high value handcuffs, so it made sense to grab him. And with Austin Eckler injured, we thought, great. High valued handcuff stepping into a lead role. Perfect. In week 2, he had just 13 carries for 39 yards. And we gave him a pass because it was against Tennessee, and you just don't run and can't run on Tennessee. So we rolled him out in week 3 in a good matchup with Minnesota, and it got even worse. 11 carries for 12 yards, 1 reception for 5 yards. Austin Eckler has made his point. Kelley simply cannot step into the lead back role and produce even close to the level that Eckler can. Kelley is not a high value handcuff, not the one that we thought he was. Eckler is questionable again. Either he plays and we drop Kelley, or he sits and we still drop Kelley, because there is no way that we can confidently roll him out this week, even against Las Vegas. After that, there's a bye week. Just go grab a handcuff on waivers that has actual upside. Drop Kelley. And finally, Dalton Schultz. I recommend this only in shallow leagues because tight end has been so shaky that in deep leagues there might not be a better option than Schultz on waivers. So there's no point in dropping him if you aren't actually upgrading. But in shallow leagues, Dalton Schultz just needs to be dropped. You either already grabbed an option on waivers or you drafted somebody else and Schultz is already on the bench. But if Schultz is your only option, it is time to start streaming matchups. He is tight end 13-9. And that is what has been a very pass-friendly situation. The receivers are thriving. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, even Robert Woods had 2 good performances. CJ Stroud is thriving and apparently doesn't need a safety blanket. Dalton Schultz is just being left out of the fun, and it is time to move on. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to Fantasy Pros, and remember, if you're ready to make a bold statement after dominating the first 3 weeks of your fantasy football league, introducing the Bling Ring from Trophy Smack, the championship ring that shouts victory. We've teamed up with Trophy Smack to bring you an epic giveaway that will take your league celebrations to the next level. To be eligible, all you need to do is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel, your ultimate source for fantasy football insights and updates. Leave a comment on any of our videos, and that's it. The best part, we'll be announcing the lucky winner right here on the channel, so don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop and when it's time to claim your prize. Get ready to elevate your fantasy football glory with the Bling Ring from Trophy Smack and stand out as the true champion that you are. Subscribe, comment, and let the bling do the talking.